everyone, and welcome again to the Prado Museum for another of our weekly sessions in English here with the American Friends of the Prado Museum. Today we're going to be looking at a magnificent portrait by Goya of Gaspar Melchor de Jovellanos. Goya painted a lot of portraits of the Spanish royal family because he was a court painter, but he also made a lot of other portraits of political and cultural figures of his time, and many of them were his friends. And Jovellanos was a great friend of Goya, and he was one of these great personalities of the Enlightenment in Spain. He worked tirelessly for the advancement, for the progress of Spain at the end of the 18th century. And here Goya captures not only his physical likeness, but also his psychological complexity and his intellectual ideas, his spirit and reformist ideals. Jovellanos held a lot of different positions in politics and in cultural institutions, and he was known for his advanced and progressive ideas in defense of social equality. He worked for agrarian reform, for educational reform. He was in favor of limiting the involvement of the church in state matters, and all of these were even a little bit, were really progressive ideas and even a little bit dangerous around this time near the French Revolution. And so Jovellanos was actually told to move away from Madrid, and he moved back to Gijón, where he was from, and lived there for several years. And when he was there, he founded an institute, which was one of the institutions that was most dear to him, the Royal Institute of Navigation and Mineralogy. And Goya included a reference to that institution in this painting. If we look here behind this table, there's a statue. There's a statue of Minerva, or Athena. Athena being the goddess of arts and also of wisdom. This is a reference also to Jovellanos' intelligence and his commitment as a man of science and letters, to his commitment to intellectual endeavors. And Minerva is holding a shield, and on that shield is a reference to this Royal Institute. He also included these books that are on the table and papers in his hand. All of this symbolizes Jovellanos' commitment to knowledge and to education. He was invited back to Madrid in 1797, and he took on the position of Minister of Justice. And this is the role that he had when he was painted by Goya here. This is the role that he took on. But this isn't a very conventional portrait of somebody as minister, right? This looks like Goya has painted somebody that he knows really well, like he's painted his friend. Because the two were good friends. Jovellanos and Goya met each other in the salones, in the tertulias, and the get-togethers that were organized by the Duchess of Alba. And they got along really well. They held each other in really high esteem. Jovellanos even learned sign language to be able to speak with Goya, because we know that Goya lost his hearing as he got older. And he uses this light and shadow to convey depth and character. Jovellanos stands out when he's bathed in light against the dark background. And we can see him sitting down and feeling overwhelmed, feeling entirely overwhelmed and challenged at this daunting new task he has ahead of him. How is he going to be able to apply all of these progressive ideas that he has? And if we get close, we can also see some of the great details of Goya's brushwork, some of this brushwork that he's learned from Velázquez, right? That he's able to do so much with so little. And we can look at things like from far away, we can see that this inkwell is this perfectly described inkwell and have all of its detail. And as we get close, we can see that those reflections are just nothing but just little blotches of paint. And the same with the highlights in the papers here. Like he's just swiped the paintbrush with all of that confidence, all of that virtuosity that he has. And the same thing with the texture here and in the chair. Wonderful details. And so Jovellanos is sitting here, getting to work, thinking about this enormous task that he has ahead of him. And he's really painted in a very personal way as well, because you notice that he doesn't have any insignia. He doesn't really have anything that shows any of his positions or any of his distinctions. Goya is painting somebody that he knows and that he understands, that he comprehends really well. And he's chosen to put him in a really particular position, right? He's got his hand is holding up his head here. He's resting his head in his hand, leaning against his table with his legs crossed below him. And this is a very specific reference because this is the classical pose for melancholy. Melancholy is this idea inspired from antiquity that artists, that thinkers, that creators, that people that had some kind of a lot of thoughts in their head, that they had some kind of a sickness. And that this kind of a sickness would be this kind of lonesome feeling, this anguish, these tortured thoughts that these kind of people, that these kind of creators would have. So this is a feeling that Goya himself would also be able to identify with deeply. Jovellanos was also a writer, he was also a poet, so he was also a creator, and we can see how he's tortured with these thoughts. These enormous thoughts are weighing on him. And this iconography was really established by Dürer in an engraving, and Goya referenced that engraving several times, and we can even see that Goya's actually made a reference to himself here as well, because around this time Goya also created the famous engraving El sueño de la razón produce monstruos, the sleep of reason produces monsters, which we can see here. And I think you can see some of the similarities in the position of Jovellanos and of Goya, especially in the position of the legs here and leaning up against the table, the melancholy of the artist. So Goya is showing us that Jovellanos was having all of these thoughts, that he had all of these ideas weighing on him, and that Goya could completely comprehend that that's something that they shared. These two great figures of the Enlightenment working to bring progress to Spain and advanced liberal ideas. And as always, this is a wonderful example of Goya's ability not just to capture physical likeness, but also the psychology of the person that he is representing, and more than that, also a moment in society that he lived in. So thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you again next week for more conversations in English.